All right, everybody, welcome back to the KPS Stories podcast. I'm your host, Steve.
And I'm your co-host, Ethan.
We have a very special program lined up for everybody today. It's the KPS's top Bigfoot films. This is one a lot of our fans have been asking for, so here it is. Now, when you think about a Bigfoot movie, you think of bad CGI, lackluster costumes, and even worse acting. But that's what makes them great. And some of these movies stand out above all the others, and that's what I want to talk about here this afternoon. So I'm actually going to start with a newer one that's an Amazon Prime original, which is how you know it's going to be good, right there. It's called Bigfoot the Conspiracy. And what happens in this movie is basically that a retired CIA operative has to investigate strange happenings at his in-laws' house. So, like, his wife's parents are getting old or something like that, but their chickens are all missing one night. And then, like, there's this giant tree that's just in their yard that had been uprooted and put there. So they call him in to figure out what's going on. So he goes out to the property, and wouldn't you know, Bigfoot is responsible for all these things. But what he finds out is much more disturbing, because it turns out that the CIA, his former employer, is looking for the creature. And he bumps into these agents that he used to work with, and they explain to him that the government wants to get Bigfoot DNA so that they can create a race of super soldiers. And this creature has been eluding them for months and months. They're closing in on it. They're trying to imprison it or whatever. So what basically happens about halfway through the movie is that there's a fight between two different groups of this CIA team because they want to take the credit for capturing Bigfoot. And there's a bunch of characters that don't mean anything that get shot, and all this kind of stuff happens. And ultimately, this dude's rival from back when he worked for the government is now in charge, and he's trying to catch Bigfoot. So the main character follows Bigfoot to an abandoned warehouse in the woods. And there's like drums of nuclear waste just hanging around, and it's just like the back of an Amazon warehouse, because this movie is written, directed, and starring all by the same guy. Once again, if that tells you anything. And he comes face to face with the creature, and he has to decide, is he going to hide Bigfoot's secret, or is he going to help the government take his DNA? And I don't want to spoil the ending because you got to watch the movie to find out what happens. But it's one of those things where to say I went in with zero expectations would be an understatement. But it actually delivered. It was actually a pretty enchanting movie for an hour 15, an hour and a half, however long it was. So, Bigfoot the Conspiracy, that's the first one on our list.
And one guy made the movie.
Yeah, and if you look at the credits at the end, like, his wife and daughter in the movie are his wife and daughter in real life. Kind of like how we just wrote people into our projects, whether they want to do them or not.
So he just decided to just make a home movie and then sell it on Amazon?
More or less.
I hope people buy it.
Yeah, I wouldn't have paid for it, but it's fun. So the next one on the list is actually another Amazon original. It's called Something in the Woods, which the title right there tells you that it's gonna be one of those. So this is another one where it's just like a random guy decides he's gonna star and direct in this movie about Bigfoot. And I guess, because I looked him up afterwards, he's like a pretty famous Christian musician or something like that. So it's supposed to be a movie about like family values and stuff like that. So what happens in this movie, this dude lives in like Texas with his wife and kids, whatever. They have this big house and a barn and all this stuff. Well, one day their young son is playing out in their yard and he sees a strange creature on the other side of the field. So he comes back and he's like, "Dad, I saw Bigfoot." And the father's like, "No, Bigfoot's not real, son."
You saw a deer.
Yeah, basically. So it turns out that as the kid is sleeping one night, he says that he sees Bigfoot outside his window, like looking in at him while he's sleeping. The father's like, "That's impossible because his window is 9 feet off the ground." Until later that morning, the father goes outside and he sees a muddy handprint on the window. And it turns out that something was there. So,
Plot twist. It's the dad putting handprints on the window to mess with his kid.
so the guy works as a logger. He's like a fucking lumberjack, naturally. And he goes to work the next day and he's telling his friends that like Bigfoot's at his house. And they're all making fun of him and telling him he's stupid and all this kind of shit. So then there's this really weird scene where he's like at Denny's eating breakfast with this family and the coworkers come up to him and start harassing him and he like tells them off and like throws bacon at them and then it goes to the next scene. Like it has no context. There's no reason for it to exist. But it happens.
Sometimes those are the best movies with just random stuff.
I mean, the whole movie doesn't need to exist, but it actually gets pretty good. So it turns out that one of his coworkers believed him. And like after the douchey ones leave the restaurant, like the other one comes up to him and he's like, "Chris, I believe everything you said and I want to help you get to the bottom of this." So the main character says, "Why don't you come by the house tonight with your gun? We'll have a couple beers and we'll wait for the creature to show up."
Couple beers and a gun. That doesn't sound like a good mix.
So then it shows a time lapse of like them sitting on the porch and it's sunset. There's like just a case of beer sitting there. And then it shows like a couple hours later and it's half a case of beer. And then it shows it later on and there's no beers left. And they're like getting like stumbly and all that. And the guy's like, "Oh, Chris, it's 2:30 in the morning. Like, I gotta get home. Like, give me a call if something happens." And needless to say, 5 minutes after the friend leaves, Sasquatch shows up. And the guy doesn't really know what to do. He comes to find out that Bigfoot's living in his barn. And the big revelation, the big turning point of the story, the dude goes into the barn with like his flashlight and his rifle. And it does that thing that every one of these movies does where it's like the shaky camera with the flashlight in the dark. And there's just a bad CGI Bigfoot at one point. And the guy thinks it's going to attack him or something. But it actually doesn't. And they have this moment where they lock eyes and they're looking at each other. And then another Bigfoot comes over. And then like a young Bigfoot comes over with them. And the guy realizes that this Sasquatch was just trying to raise his family the whole time. Just like he was. And then the movie ends before there's any resolution. But I guess it was a moving story that Bigfoot has family and relationships and shit just like we do. So if you're looking for a movie, like in terms of objective standards, it's horrible. But if you like this kind of thing, it's pretty good as far as Sasquatch shows go. Then you got one of my personal favorites. It's 2011's Snow Beast. And this is one that I actually showed in my college writing class one semester on Halloween because everybody was doing well and nobody wanted to learn about persuasive essays anymore. So I told them, we'll watch this Bigfoot movie on Amazon Prime because Once again, it's a Prime original. Most of these are. They don't have like real movie deals for any of this. And this one is just iconic. So, your main character and his daughter are reeling from the fact that the mother recently left them. They had an ugly divorce or whatever, you know. They haven't heard from her in years, kind of thing. And the husband is a biologist who studies the lynx population in Colorado. And he takes his team on this expedition into the Rockies every year to track the lynx. But this year, something's different. When they get there, there aren't any lynx around. And the husband and his assistants are like, well, this is so weird. Like, where are the lynx? What happened to them? And like his assistant, who's like the girl he's trying to get with now as he's trying to rebound from his ex-wife, she's like, oh, well, maybe the food source shifted. And then his other young assistant, who's like, he was in like one of those spring break movies. I don't know which one, but he's just like this young dude. He's like, well, maybe there's a new predator. And then that's when the movie takes the expected twist that there is a snow beast in those woods that's been eating the lynx. And sure enough, it begins to stalk the research team and it starts to kill them off one by one. Until you get to this heartbreaking scene where it's the daughter and the father and everyone else is dead. And they have to fight off the snow creature as it's attacking them. So they don't have any real weapons because they're researchers, but they have a flare gun. And you're watching this movie and you're thinking like, oh, she's going to shoot the monster with the flare gun and that'll kill it, right? Like, that would make sense. She takes the flare gun and shoots it into the mountain, which causes an avalanche that buries the snow beast. And that's the end of the movie. Well, the end of the movie is the snow beast's hand coming up out of the snow. It's so bad that it's amazing.
I feel like I've seen that movie before, and I remember watching it. Like, it is cringe. It's very cringy and bad, if I remember correctly.
You do remember correctly. There's one part where it shows the snow creature like eating something. Like, I don't know what it's supposed to be, but there's like fake blood from Party City. And like, it's like a plastic stomach or whatever it's supposed to be. You clearly see that the dude is wearing a black tank top under the suit. And like you see like 5 inches of his back. Like they didn't even try. The other really memorable part is that they set up surveillance cameras around their cabin so they can monitor the lynx population, okay? And in one part, the daughter stays at the cabin when everyone else goes to like put out like traps or whatever. And she's watching on the camera as like Jesse Ventura or whatever his name is and the father are on camera 1. And she's like, Dad, there's something on camera 5. I don't know what it is. And then it like shows this security camera footage of this dude in a Yeti costume, like shambling around. And she's like, Dad, he's on camera 3. It's the funniest shit. And they get on a snowmobile and it shows the guy in the Sasquatch costume chasing them through the woods. It's something else. It's one of those movies that's like, what the fuck were they doing? But at the same time, that's what makes it memorable. That's what makes a show like that good.
So the Sasquatch they found on camera was a fake. It was just someone in a costume.
So, okay, so that raises a good possibility. Like, you see a lot of Bigfoot documentaries, too. Probably the worst one I've ever seen, an English teacher, that was bad. There was one called The Kentucky Wild Man, Legend of the Frasier Lands. And this one was like if you combined every bad aspect of Ghost Adventures with every bad thing about cryptid documentaries into one, you get this movie. And it's these dudes in Kentucky. They have like a name for themselves, like the Southwest Bigfoot Search Team. I don't know, some bullshit like that. And they go out in the woods, and they're doing the thing where they're banging on trees and making monkey noises and shit, trying to get Sasquatch to come out and approach them. And they get to this part where they claim that they're hearing Bigfoot like screaming in the night. And they just overlay the call of a fox over like the shot of them in the woods, and they're all looking around acting shocked. And the other good part of this movie, the dude is like, there's a strong connection between Bigfoot and UFOs, so we suspect that Sasquatch is an alien. And they're in the woods, and it's the middle of the night, and the guy's like, oh my god, do you see that? And everyone's acting shocked. Holy shit, there's a huge light in the sky. Do you guys see that? And they're all getting really into it. They're all freaking out. And this goes on for literally 6 or 8 minutes. But what's weird about it is that the camera only shows their faces. The camera never shows this light in the sky that they're all reacting to. And in between all of this, there's just random 15-second interludes of heavy metal music. Like, it's very stupid.
Production couldn't afford the light in the sky.
I guess I'll talk about one other documentary. I don't even know what it was called, but it was like Psychic Bigfoot. It was something like that. And this lady comes on there and she goes, well, I have psychic powers. And the KPS is a firm believer in psychic powers, but this was pushing it just a little too far. Like, my suspension of disbelief was really being challenged. And she's talking about how when her and her husband first met, they had an encounter with Sasquatch. And the Sasquatch told them that they were right for each other and that they should get married. So they did.
Kind of like Shrek and Fiona.
Yeah, very similar. So that part was like, okay, I've watched some pretty wacky shit like that comes with this territory. But then the director takes you into this couple's home, and there's just paintings of Sasquatch all over the wall. And they're like very happy looking Sasquatch. And they're like smiling, and there's one that has like a blue tinge, and Bigfoot's crying and all this stuff. And the lady goes, Bigfoot doesn't like being seen as a monster. They have feelings just like we do. And she's like holding up paintings that she did, and she's like, these are psychic images that the Bigfoot gave me so that I could portray them to humans, so that maybe there could be more acceptance between them. And that was the only time I've ever turned off a Bigfoot documentary. I couldn't do it anymore.
Everything else is cool except for the acceptance part.
No, of course not. It was just so ridiculous. Like, even I couldn't justify watching it. And, you know. All right, so we got to talk about actual good Bigfoot movies. This is a short list, so this won't take that long to describe. If you go back into the 70s, the original drive-in classic, The Legend of Boggy Creek, is a great movie. Because the dude made this movie for $25,000, and he made something like $70 million on it, if I remember correctly. Like, he made a disgusting amount of money on this movie that he just made with, like, his handy cam and a couple of his friends from college. But it's one of the OG Bigfoot movies where they're in Fouke, Arkansas, and people are reporting a strange man-like creature in the swamps. And the movie tracks their attempts to get to the bottom of this mystery. And there's there's three really memorable scenes. And the first one's actually the opening, the introduction to the movie, where it shows the dude having a flashback to when he was a little kid. And it's really creepy, like it's really eerie the way it's shot and stuff. It's this kid who's supposed to be like 8 or 9 years old just running through a field at sunset. And the narrator, who is him as an adult, is like, I was 8 years old the first time I heard it scream. And then it just shows this kid running through the woods. And it shows like frogs in the swamp croaking, and then they get silent. And like it shows all these animals looking scared, because like 70s Bigfoot movies usually started with that montage. The next one, and the last one I'm going to talk about, actually starts with the same kind of montage of creatures being terrified of it. And this kid is like running through a field and shit, like running through the wee, and then he has to like jump over a fence. And he gets to the back door of his house and he looks back, and the camera just shows the red setting sun. And you just hear a chilling, like, scream that's supposed to be Bigfoot. And that scene's actually really cool. It's pretty iconic. The next good scene, it shows Bigfoot wandering in the woods. And this costume is like it's impossible not to laugh the first time you see it. Because it's like, they just took like, I don't even know how to describe it. They just took like a couple of wigs and threw them together and threw them on this person. And it shows the creature wandering in the woods. And this song starts playing, and it's like 70s kind of vibe, and it's like about how lonely Sasquatch is. And it's kind of moving, it's kind of tragic. And then there's the last scene where it attacks just like these hippie kids hanging out one night. Like, they're all probably baked off their ass, like just sitting in their friend's house. And all of a sudden, Bigfoot breaks through the door and like grabs somebody. And then the movie just ends. But it's a classic. It was a trendsetter, paradigm shifting movie, whatever. And it leads us to the last Bigfoot movie that I want to talk about. And there are many more, but this is the best one. This one is called Sasquatch: The Legend of Bigfoot, and it's from 1975. And just like Boggy Creek, it starts out the same way with this nature montage where everyone is like hanging out, like there's like foxes playing and a rabbit and frogs and shit. And one by one they fall silent. And then it shows like a large shadow. It doesn't show Bigfoot until the very end of the movie, which is honestly 90% of why it's good, is that Bigfoot's on screen for maybe 2 minutes out of this 2-hour long movie. But they set it up throughout this whole thing. The premise of the movie is that they're on an expedition, very similar to the time KPS went looking for Bigfoot on the back campus, except much more epic. So they're on this journey through the Pacific Northwest for about an hour, 40 minutes. And as they're going, you have like this ensemble cast of characters. The skeptical reporter guy. The old guy that he never saw Bigfoot, but he heard a lot of stories. Then you have the researcher. And then, of course, you have the Native American guy, whose people have always told stories. Like basically every stereotype associated with Bigfoot research, just riding horses together through the wilderness for an hour and a half, is basically what this movie is. And what makes it really cool is that it actually tells you a story, like it actually goes somewhere. And what it basically gets to is they come to this desolate region in Western Canada. And they emphasize how, like, nobody's ever been there before, and it's a place that no mortal man had ever walked, and all this kind of stuff. And there's an eerie feeling in the place, like they're being watched. So they set up their cameras, they set up their equipment and all this stuff, and they wait. And they wait. But then after a while, a bunch of Sasquatches show up. And the Bigfoots come out of the woods, and they're like screaming and throwing stuff, and they don't hurt any of the people that are there, but they break all of the recording equipment and all of the high-tech measurements they had taken. The Bigfoot comes in, they smash all of that stuff. And in the final scene of the movie, it just shows them packing up their shit to go back home. The narrator asks, is it better if some mysteries are left unanswered? Are there some things that man isn't supposed to know and places we're not supposed to be? And he wondered whether those places belonged to creatures like the Sasquatch. And then it cuts into a delightfully cheesy 70s song about Bigfoot living up in the mountains. And it's honestly the best Bigfoot movie I've seen. And I do try to watch every one that comes out. And they're usually just hideously bad. So that's a wrap on that. That's all the Bigfoot movies I want to talk about on this episode. So I hope everybody enjoys this. You get a laugh out of it. You get a drive to wherever you're going out of it. And we'll catch you on the next episode.
Yep. Thanks for listening, and go watch a cringy Bigfoot movie.